You're at Kufyan Aleph and Aleph.
You say 112, Rabbi?
111a.
Oh, okay.
1 second. Okay, we saw the Mishnah. Briefly review it. Let's review the Mishnah again. Somebody, whether a person hired a person or rented an animal, or he rented vessels. There's the positive obligation to pay them on time. And not to leave the payment overnight. When is this true? When you are asked for payment. But if the leaser, the lesser or the worker did not ask for money, so any overall there's no violation. Basically, he had a chenveni. A chenveni is like a grocery store owner. He told him, basically, I'll give you a line of credit at the grocery, or I'll give you.
Rabbi, if these are evil properties, does that make him the lesser of two evils?
So or shulchani is a money changer. Basically, there's a merchant that's gonna pay the worker, and this is a committed relationship, meaning that the worker, the money changer or the merchant agrees to pay his workers whatever arrangement they have. So any over all of there's no violation of delaying payment because you're not obligated to pay. The obligation to pay is on the money changer or the merchant. If you have a worker in his time, meaning as soon as the time comes for him to collect his money and go, if he says I did not get paid during that time, then he makes an oath and he collects. Now, generally speaking, every oath that the Torah requires, or that even the rabbis enacted, virtually everyone is in the category of making an oath and exempting yourself. This oath is the opposite. The worker makes an oath and obligates himself. Not obligates, but he collects money. He obligates the employer. And this is one of the unique exceptions. We'll talk about it more. He makes an oath and he collects. 1 second. Sorry. 1 second. I'm sorry. If the guy, if it's no longer during the period where you would violate the laws of paying him on time, meaning it's a few days later, so then we don't believe him anymore with an oath. We'll discuss why. But if there are witnesses that he asked for payment during that initial, post-work periods, he worked, and then there's a day or so or half a day, and he asked to be paid and he wasn't paid, and there are witnesses that can attest to that. So then he makes an oath and he collects.
But this is also Avas Malay. But if Adam that he was
correct
earlier.
Correct.
And what's the condition?
That is witnesses that connects him to that same time period. So even though he didn't make an oath immediately, because here we know that he asked immediately, so therefore we allow him to make an oath. A Ger Taishiv is a non-Jew who basically doesn't worship idols and he keeps the basic Noahide laws. So he too, if you don't pay him on time, you violate the law of paying him on time that requires you to pay him on time. However, you don't have the negative commandment. What's the difference? We'll have to see. So I'm sure you also, there's 3 separate verses here, and we'll have to go through all 3 of them. Who's the Mishnah like? It's not the first opinion that talks about the word achicha, and it's not Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehudah. What does that mean? What are we referring to? The Tanya we learned, top of 111b. Okay, there are 2 verses here in Deuteronomy. The first and second verse in Deuteronomy, and then 1 verse in Leviticus, in Vayikra. Okay. The verse in Dvarim, Deuteronomy, is Leisashik Sochar Ani Ve'evian Me'achecha, from your brother. Okay. Oy Megerecha Shabartzecha Bisharecha. So Me'achecha, what does your brother mean? Prat la'acherem, it excludes non-Jews. Okay. So this is the verse about don't extort the wages of an employee, and we exclude non-Jews. Non-Jews are not included in this prohibition. Okay. However, the verse does say gercha. Gercha is the people that live in your area. Zeger tzedek. This refers to true converts. Bisharecha, in your gates. Ze oichan levelos. These are people that eat non-kosher food, meaning these are what we call a ger toshav. Okay, Einli el schar odam. This is only true of human beings, of employees. Minayin l'rabes behema v'kelim. How do we know that we include as well vessels and animals? Talmud loimer ba'aretzecha, in your land. Kol sheba'aretzecha, anything that you use to deal with the soil, to till the earth. Okay, anybody who's included under the rubrics in this verse, it violates every one of the 5 prohibitions. Of course, the 5 are really the 4, because 2 of them cannot be violated simultaneously. One is keeping the wages overnight, and one is keeping them past sundown. Obviously, that's mutually exclusive. And by the way, and like we said yesterday, you only violate this law once. It's the morning after. Or the evening after, in the case where you own the work by daytime. Regardless, according to the first unnamed opinion, anybody who's included in this verse, the convert, the animals and the vessels, and the non-Jew that doesn't worship idols, you violate all the laws pertaining to not paying him on time. This does not fit with the Mishnah, because the Mishnah specifically says that a ger tzedek, a ger toshav, a non-Jew who does not worship idols, violates a specific commandment, l'solan olav hashemesh. And similarly, with regard to vessels and animals, the verse says two of the violations. Wait a second. I'm sorry. The Mishnah says that for a ger toshav, that's a non-Jew who does not worship idols, you do not violate the prohibition of leisolan. But the first opinion of this brayso, it clearly says you do. You violate all of them. Okay. Mikana amrub. From here we learned echad tzachar adam, echad tzachar behema, echad tzachar kelim. Yesh ber mishum b'yom titin schar, v'yesh ber mishum baltolan. If you rented humans, you hired people, employees, or you rented vessels or animals, you violate the two violations of paying him on time and not leaving his payment overnight. Rabbi Yehudah says, "Ger toshav yesh mishum b'yom titin schar, ve'ein mishum leisolan." This first half is like the Mishnah, that a non-idol worshipping non-Jew, you are obligated to pay him on time, but you don't violate the negative commandment of withholding his payment past morning. 1 second. Yeah. Okay. 1 second. Behem of a kalim, if you're renting vessels, renting vessels, you only incur the violation of extortion. Don't extort him. What did I say? I'm sorry. Behem of a kalim, animals and vessels, you have to pay him on time, otherwise it's called extorting. But the other obligations pertaining to withholding payment, like leaving his payment overnight or paying him the obligation to pay him on time, you don't violate. Which also contradicts the Mishnah, because the Mishnah says that you do violate withholding payment overnight if you rent an animal or a vessel. and don't pay on time. Mani, whose opinion? Itana Kamma, if the Mishnah is the first author, the unnamed author, the me'achicha that learns excludes non-Jews from the verse, excludes idol worshippers from achicha, your brother. Kasha ger toishav. We have a question about a ger toishav, a non-idolater. According to the unnamed opinion, violates both loisolin and b'yamitit and but the Mishnah says you only violate the positive b'yamitit and scharai, but the law of loisolin, of withholding payment overnight, is not violated. So that can't be. Either Rabbi Yossi, if it's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, kasha b'hem v'kelim. Well, the rabbis say that renting animals or vessels incurs a violation of loisolin. That's what the Mishnah says, withholding payment overnight. But according to Rabbi Yossi, you don't violate withholding payment overnight. You only violate a different commandment, the one in Leviticus, which is lo sashik, don't extort. So Rava says, of course, there's a third opinion, and that's the third opinion is who we're going with. Okay, Hi Tana Tana de Rabbi Shmuel. It's the school of Rabbi Shmuel's thought. The Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, the school of Rabbi Shmuel taught echad sachar adam ve'echad sachar behema, whether a person rented a man, meaning he hired an employee, or he rented an animal, ve'echad sachar kelim, or he rented vessels. Yesh mishum b'yamitit nschari umishum loisolin. Renting animals or vessels, or hiring an employee, you incur two violations: paying him on time and the positive obligation to pay him on time, plus the negative obligation of not withholding payment overnight.
Which could be the other one if it's by day.
Sorry, or the other one, right, or in the case of daytime. Okay, 1 second. A gertoishav, a non-idolater, you have an obligation to pay him on time. But you do not have the negative commandment of withholding payment overnight. Okay. So now, of course, we sort of compare and contrast the opinions between the first Tana Kamma's opinion and Rabbi Yossi. Okay, let's explain. My time Tana Kamma the me'achicha gamar. The rabbis.
Why don't we use my time Mishnah?
What?
Mishnah time.
So we don't. First of all, we don't know how Tanya Rishmal gave a set of rules, but didn't explain how he got there.
I know what are we asking my time at Shmuel as well. We're just asking my time of these other two times.
Well, we'll get to it because once we know the frameworks of the rabbis, the Tana Kamma and Rabbi Yossi explain their reasoning. Once we understand the reasoning, we can see what the rabbis picked and choose from the Tana Kamma and Rabbi Yossi. Okay, so my time at Tana Kamma. What's the reasoning of Tana Kamma? Meaning the first unnamed opinion, they say everybody's in the same category, and there's one exclusion, and it's an idolater. Achicha is your brother and not an idolater. So my time to Tana Kamma. What's the source of Tana Kamma? He learns it out of your brother, meaning your brother excludes an idolater, but everybody else is completely included in the entire rubric of prohibitions. What's his source? Gamar sachar. Because the word sacher, a hired worker, is used in all the verses, so therefore, I'm sorry, in both Deuteronomy and in Leviticus. So we compare the two verses. Anyone who's in one category is in every category. Rabbi Yehudah lo gomer sacher.
Tana Kamma includes ger toishav as well.
Correct, and he says ger toishav violates all the prohibitions, meaning nighttime, daytime. No, an idolater is excluded completely from achicha. A ger toishav is a non-Jew who's not an idolater. He's in every prohibition because he says sacher. We compare Deuteronomy with Leviticus. Anyone who's in Deuteronomy is also in Leviticus. Anyone who's excluded from Deuteronomy is excluded from Leviticus, and therefore you're either in it or you're out of it. An idolater is out of it, no prohibition at all, and a non-idolater is in it. He incurs every violation. However, he does not compare the two of them. And therefore he said, okay, therefore, if he doesn't compare the two, then a ger toishav is only included for the verses in Deuteronomy. That would be, where is it? Loisashak, don't extort him. Because the verse of extortion. 1 second. The ger toshev is not included in loisolin. That would be the prohibition of Leviticus, but he is included in baltolin, the prohibition of keeping his wages overnight or past sunset of Deuteronomy. Similarly, vessels do not incur a prohibition of loisolin because vessels are included under the Deuteronomy rubric, but not under Leviticus. 1 second. Okay. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, why vessels or animals? Rabbi Yossi explains, violates loisashrik, don't extort. That's a verse in Deuteronomy. But also another verse in Deuteronomy is pay him on time. So why isn't there a positive obligation to pay on time for animals or vessels? So the Gemara says, Tani Rav Chanina Amar Krav Loisavi Olav Hashemesh Ki Anihu. Mishain Bonan De Anias Vashiros Yatsu Behem V'Kelim She'enim Bonan De Anias Vashiros. Okay, in the verse that obligates you to pay on time. 1 second. Yeah. The verse indicates ki anihu. The reason why I should pay on time is because the worker is poor. That's a limitation. And a worker where poverty is an appropriate term, meaning an employee, not an animal or vessels, that's when the Torah says pay him on time, don't pay, don't hang its payment overnight.
But what's the definition of an ani?
Well, it's definitely a person, that's for sure. We'll talk about what an ani is.
Okay. All right.
But there's a difference here between an ani and an evian. We'll get to it in a moment. But
ani means different things to different people.
I'm sorry?
Ani means different things to different people until a specific legal definition is put to it.
Yeah, there are legal definitions, but the point here is it's not, a poor person is not of either a vessel or an animal. They don't fit into that category.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, they can't be included under the positive obligation of paying on time or the obligation to pay him before nightfall. So the only obligation we have for a renter is a negative commandment, don't extort. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. According to the rabbis, he anihu because he's poor. That's a limitation. That tells you that the prohibition, again, the rabbis say you're either in it or out of it. Once you're in it, you're included in all the prohibitions. The prohibition of either don't pay him overnight, don't hang the payment overnight, or pay him before sundown. Pay before sundown is Deuteronomy, don't pay him overnight is Leviticus. And you're included in obligation of pay him on time, plus loisashek, don't extort, and potentially loisigzal, don't steal, but specifically apply to workers. Okay, so ki'anihu, why does the verse say because he's poor? Well, that's not a limitation according to the rabbis because everybody, even vessels, are included under the same rubric. So how do they explain? Why does the Torah write because he's a poor man? It's not relevant to say he's poor because it applies even to people who aren't poor or to things that don't have, that the question of poverty isn't relevant. So, okay, interesting law. If you have two sets of workers, a group that's poor and a group that's rich, your obligation is to pay the poor workers before the wealthy workers. According to Rabbi Yehudah, this obligation comes, the fact that the verse specifically says, don't extort ani ve'evyan, the poor or the evyan. The evyan is the absolutely destitute. An ani is somebody who has a little bit of money, but not enough to live 12 months. He doesn't have $20,000 in the bank, whatever, 40,000, something like that. An evyan is someone who's totally destitute. So he's clearly, we see here that the first prohibition of extortion is the first category prohibition requires you to first pay the poorest, then pay those that are more privileged. Okay, V'tana Kamma. And what about the first author? Why does the Torah repeat itself? In one verse in Deuteronomy, it says ani, a poor person, ki anihu, because he's poor. In the other verse, it says don't extort the poor and the destitute. Okay. An interesting rule here. An ani, a poor person, comes before a rich person, and he also comes before a person who's totally destitute. The absolutely destitute gets paid after the ani, after the poor. Why is this? Because the ani is poor. It's true he doesn't have $40,000 in the bank, but he's also not going to the food bank and collecting foods. He's immensely struggling paycheck to paycheck. He's borrowing money, but he hasn't yet taken the charity of the totally destitute, and therefore he has priority for payment because he actually has to go out and buy money and buy foods. But the totally destitute, he's already on the books for the soup kitchens and the food banks, and therefore he is not entitled. He gets pushed second in line for salary because he'll already have food from the food bank. He won't have to degrade himself further by going to the food bank, which is what the poor person has to do because he's already done it.
He's going to Evian, even though he obviously has a job.
So clearly the job isn't enough. Not only is not enough, it's not even close to enough. Exactly. He has, I guess this job probably means it's like a one-time, like a one-off. Because he's still
it's minimum wage and he lives on Wilshire Boulevard. He's in trouble.
Yeah, this is where an ani is the guy going to the food bank. He's totally destitute. Today, the Evian. Now, today I think it's a little different. I think the food bank is a little more generous. But the type of guy to go to soup kitchens, and not buy his own food, that's the type of person we're looking at. And once he's already degraded himself to go to a soup kitchen, then he's second in line. The first in line is those that haven't degraded themselves and still are sort of struggling to make ends meet. It's necessary for the Torah to say that an ani, a poor person, comes before both a destitute and a rich. Because if it would have only said a destitute, the destitute guy, the reason why the Torah puts him second in line is because he's not embarrassed to collect charity. But both the rich and the poor are embarrassed to collect charity, and therefore, maybe there's no priority to the poor over the rich. Both of them deserve their salary at the same time. V'yeshmin an osher, if the Torah would have only said that an osher gets pushed second in line, because he doesn't need the money. But a destitute person who obviously does need the money, maybe the destitute guy doesn't go second in line either. So tzricha, therefore, the verse had to say both of them, meaning that a poor person is prioritized before the rich person and before the utterly destitute. Okay, so now we get back to our Mishnah. What does our Mishnah say? If he compares Leviticus with Deuteronomy, then even a non-idolater should have every single violation. But the Mishnah doesn't say that. The Mishnah says for a non-idolater, you only have the positive commandment of paying him on time. If he doesn't say sachar, so how does he know that if he doesn't use sachar, that comparison between Leviticus and Deuteronomy, how does he know that vessels or animals, how does he know that they are also under the rubric of withholding payment overnight, which is Leviticus? Because the only way to include Leviticus to Deuteronomy is to compare the two. But if they're compared, then why don't we compare them also with regard to a non-idolater? Someone says, they do have that comparison. The shiny house in Amar Kroll is someone pula socher itcha ad biker. Kol shepulasi itcha. Okay, meaning the verse in Leviticus specifically says anybody who works with you. Working with you includes renting an animal or hiring vessels. But what else should it include? Also a non-idolater, right? Why not? What's the difference? Well, why is a non-idolater excluded? Gemara says, yeah, because it says, Re'acha, your friend. Re'acha, your brother, meaning your co-religionist. But not a non-idolater, who's not a co-religionist. So, well, know what else is not your friend? an animal or a vessel. So why aren't they exclude? If it has to be your friend, why don't we exclude an animal or a vessel? So the Gemara says, what do you mean? Haksiv itcha, it says with you. So the Gemara says, okay, well, ma'rois. Okay, so you have an inclusion factor called itcha, with you. You have an exclusionary factor, it has to be your friend. So, okay, well, why are we putting the ger toisha of the non-idolater in the exclusion box and putting behemoth v'kelim in the inclusion box? Why don't you switch it around? Say, itcha with you includes a non-idolater, and a reyacha, your friend, includes things that don't have friendship, like an animal or vessels. That includes pugs, of course. Ma'rois l'rabis. Okay. I wasn't killed yet.
We're watching, sir. We're watching.
Okay, so why do you say? So because even though you can't be friends with a vessel or an animal, but it's still your money, still your possession, still the money of your friend. So it's sort of included under the rubric of reyacha, the inclusionary factor. Ger toishav ain't b'chal mom reyacha, but ger toishav is completely excluded from that category. Okay, Tanakama de me'achicha ha reyacha ma'av delay. Okay, the rabbis exclude a non-Jew. Remember, this is the Tanakama, the unnamed opinion. They exclude a non-Jew from achicha, from your brother, but they say that a ger toishav, a non-idolater, it has every single commandment. Everything is included into. Well, what do they do with the verse of reyacha, your friend? What do they do with that? Okay, Amaleki is a wicked guy. So the wicked guy, Amaleki me'achichan, Simor Amaleki me'achichan, nafka chad lemishra oishke v'chad lemishra gozlei. Okay, so meaning an idolater, you should pay him on time, but there's no commandment to do so. A wicked Amaleki, not only is there no prohibition or obligation, but to the contrary, his money is completely worthless. You're allowed to even refuse to pay him because of his wickedness.
You say wicked, and it doesn't mean real Amaleki.
Whatever. Those that are members of the Amaleki people, which are inherently wicked. Okay, one to permit him to allow you to extort him, to refuse payment when he works for you. And even if you actually have his money, you don't have to return it. Diashmin and Gozlai, if you talk about not refusing to return his actual possessions, the reason why the Torah would permit that is because he didn't work for you. But maybe if he worked for you, you would still have to pay. There should still be some obligation to pay him, even if it's not Torah, even if it's not a Torah commandment. But why would you be allowed to just make his wages useless? But if it would have only said his wages, I would think because he doesn't own his wages yet. That's why you can steal it. But if you have his possession, maybe you'd be obligated to return it. So therefore, we learn from here that the Torah completely permits the assets of the Amaleki people, whether you hire them or whether you actually have their assets in your possession. Okay. Rabbi Dovid Yehudah, delay. Okay. 1 second. Okay. So our Mishnah uses our Mishnah uses the word itcha in the verse of Leisalam Pula Sachar itcha with you includes animals and vessels. Rabbi Yehudah uses Sachar. He uses the Gzer Shavah to teach you that. So what does he use the word itcha for? So the Gemara says, "Mibaylek Dravasi." The Amar Basi, I feel like Sachar El lifts like Eshkel Echad Shalanavim Ivar Mishum Baltolan, meaning that the threshold to violate the prohibition of hiring a worker or not paying him is even if you had him cut just one cluster of grapes, the most minimal amount of work. Anything that's itcha with you, you violate. The idach and the other opinion, me've'elav hunaisias nafshay. This is included from the verse in Deuteronomy, which says that to the work he carries his soul. We'll have to explain that in a moment. Dover hamoiser nafshay olav, meaning anything that is labor which a person is willing to take risks for. Okay, the idach ahumi ba'alek the Tanya. What is Rabbi? Okay, so Rabbi Yossi, what is he? Rabbi Yossi says that we know even a minimal amount of work is from itcha with you, the inclusionary factor. What does he do with the? Why does the Torah emphasize that the employee takes risks by going to work? So he says, why is this guy, climbing up ladders and trees and up, ramps, and he's, potentially risking his own life? Is he not doing this because of the work, because of the payment that you're offering him? Therefore, withholding payment is like withholding his life. Another interpretation. Anyone who withholds payment from a worker, it's as if he's taking his life. Okay, whose life here is being taken? So you'd think this is obviously the worker, right? Not so fast. One says actually by refusing to pay workers, you take your own life. And the other opinion says, no. Obviously, you're taking the life of the worker, of the employee, the victim. Okay, and we'll explain both of these using verses. That by refusing to pay workers on time, you actually take your own life, meaning the penalty here is that one loses his life. The verse says, "Al tigzal dal, don't steal from the poor, kidalu, because he's poor." We'll talk about that in a moment. Valtadaka ani bishar, and don't make the poor person poorer, in the opening, at the gate. Uchsiv, and the verse says, Ki Hashem yorav rivim, because God will fight the fight. The kava es keveim nefesh, and those that cheat them, God will curse their cursors with their souls. Meaning, whose soul is going to be taken here? The oppressor. God will take the oppressor's soul. Okay. And the opinion that says it's the soul of the victim. This is the pathway of those that cheat. They steal from the victim. They steal the souls of their victim. Okay. The guy who, the opinion that says that they lose their own soul, the oppressors lose their soul. What about the fact that the verse clearly says that they steal the soul of their victims? It's not just that the oppressor gets killed, but that he steals his victim's soul. So the Gemara says, "Matam Kamma." That's the explanation of the reasoning. Matam kava es kaveim mishum dinat lo nefesh. The reason why. One second. I'm sorry. One second. Sorry, I skipped the line. What about the verse that says that they steal that God will take their soul, the soul of the oppressor? The Gemara says, one second. Hold on. I'm sorry. No, sorry. It says that the robber will steal the soul of the owner. Well, that clearly means that the victim here is the one who's losing his soul. So Gemara says, no. As Nevesh Ba'al he steals his own soul. Ba'al of the Hashta, the current owner. Meaning by stealing, he steals his own soul and gives it back to God. What about the verse that says, that God will steal the soul of the oppressor? The reason why God will curse the cursor, meaning God will curse the robber, because the robber has taken the soul of the victim. Okay, so next three lines. The employee must demand payment. If he does not demand payment, the employer does not violate any laws. Don't let the payment sleep overnight. Even if he didn't demand payment. The employee must demand payment from the employer. Yachal afilu ein lo. I would think that he violates this law even if he doesn't have anything to pay. Talmud itcha sheyesh itcha, meaning that he has the money available. Yachal afilu mchevetz lechem v'nivetz l'shulchani. Talmud itcha v'lo shemchevetz lechem v'nivetz l'shulchani. I would think you'd violate this law if you agreed that payment would be a discount at the local grocery store, or a credit at the local grocery store, or at the local money changer. Says the verse, itcha, the payment has to be with you. If you have already agreed the payment is with the merchant or with the money changer, then you are not liable if they decide to refuse payments, because that was what you agreed initially. Okay, stop here. Have a great day.
Today's Black Cookie Day.
Today's Daf is Kufay Mesa. About 3/4 of a daf behind. Tomorrow I should catch up a lot. It's short of daf. Okay, great day.